Africa's largest economy faced all the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also had a few issues that affected it in 2021 that had been in existence before coronavirus changed the world. Economic growth slowed in the third quarter, driven by easing momentum in the non-oil sector as industrial output tumbled and services and agricultural activity lost steam. However, the pace of expansion remained solid nonetheless, and the oil sector's contraction eased in the next quarter. Nigeria's economy is expected to grow at a stronger pace in 2022. The fading impact of the pandemic and the new Petroleum Industry Act, as well as the government's infrastructure push, are expected to buoy investment. However, elevated inflation, security issues, a sharper slowdown in China, which is weighing on exports, and low vaccination rates pose downside risk. Analysts see GDP growth coming in at 2.6% in 2022, which is unchanged from last month's forecast, and from 2023, we should be looking at 2.8%. There were some bright spots for Nigeria in 2021 as the economy recovered from the COVID-induced disruptions of 2020, but there were also some low points that did Africa's biggest economy more harm than good. But today, we're looking to the future. Nigeria's 2022 economic forecast is our focus. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Joining me is Muktar, Mohammed, financial analyst and the CEO of Asher Dynamic Solutions. Muktar, welcome to Business Edge again, and Happy New Year. Good to see you again. Or rather, hear from you. How are you?
Nice starting the year with you. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much for joining us. So let's go straight into this conversation. Now, there are a number of carryover issues from 2021 that will affect Nigeria's economic performance in 2022. So let's highlight what are some of those issues or trends that have followed the country into a new year.
Well, the main thing that has followed the country into the new year is the volatility in the exchange rate. We saw that then also at the end of the year, the CBN also tactically again revalued the currency. So for me, those are the things that have followed the Nigeria into the new year, and which unfortunately affect every side of our economy. So it's a big challenge. So for me, that is the highlight of what has followed us from 2021 to the 2022, and we don't seem to be any headway towards sorting it out.
All right, so there are a number of issues, and unfortunately, we probably won't be able to get into all of them, but let's take a look at something that happened just recently as we crossed over into the new year. President Mohammed Buhari signed the 2022 appropriation bill into law, and the 2022 budget has a deficit of about 6.25 trillion naira. That's approximately 3.39% of the country's GDP. Now, this is slightly above the 3% ceiling that's set by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The president alluded to the fact that the expenditure level was necessary to assist with overcoming current security challenges and accelerating post-recession growth. And he insists that Nigeria only has a revenue challenge and not a debt sustainability problem. Muktar, we've had this conversation about Nigeria's debt appetite and borrowing appetite throughout the year. But when it comes to this, this part of what the president is saying, as we go into 2022, is Nigeria prepared to address its revenue challenges?
They are not prepared. The only way they want to address their revenue challenges is to tax more business, especially SMEs and all other upcoming business startups. So definitely, I don't think they are ready to address these challenges, because when you look at the challenges, they're just talking about tax. All their revenue they think about is tax. They are not looking at employment as a risk or as a means of also adding to the tax bracket, because when you employ people, they are able to pay tax, and that also will add to the tax bracket. They are not looking at that. All they are looking at is how much revenue can go to them. They're not looking at tax as a means of growth so that they can now intend to develop the economy, and then many more people will be captured in the tax bracket because they've not been able to capture the informal sector. So the only sector they have to get that from is the formal sector. And the way you can capture more people in the formal sector is by creating the environment for more employment to come. So most people that are now being employed will be paying tax. So the challenge is still there, because government looked at the easiest way of revenue is just to create more avenue for people to be paying tax. Look at in the area of investment also. They are beginning to say, look, when you invest, your return, it will be reduced again. You have to pay tax, withholding tax. So they are not even looking at growing this economy, whether they are looking at revenue. And when you look at this revenue, what does this revenue mean? What does it do? Most of the revenue is going to go to recurrent expenditure. How many percentage is coming for current expenditure? I mean, for capital projects that will in turn be able to help SMEs, startups, and other business thrive and reduce the cost of business. Nobody is looking at that. All they are thinking is we need to get more revenue. We need to make companies pay more revenue. We need to capture more people into the revenue base. Those people that are going to capture into the revenue base are those smaller companies that are growing for them to pay more tax. Instead of trying to see how this smaller company can employ a lot of Nigerians, especially the youth. Because presently now, the time comes that about 70% of Nigerian youth are unemployed. Out of the 30% that you have that are employed, over 15 to 20% of those ones are underemployed. So you can say only 10% of Nigerian youth are gainfully employed.
Okay, so let's stay on this tax issue because it's going to be a big one for this year. So the president has said that part of strategies to increase Nigeria's revenue is increasing taxation, and he has a four-pillar approach to this. Now, the push towards increased tax revenue is something we're seeing more of across the continent, and especially after the pandemic. We did see some intent to address this with the passing of the Finance Act 2020, which had over 80 amendments to 14 different laws, and that took effect from January the 1st, 2021. But you're saying that you don't think the country is still doing enough to bring more people into the tax drive by creating jobs or an enabling environment for people to start their own businesses, and then you're able to get taxes. So what do you think Nigeria is going to do, if anything, differently? Or where does the country need to go with its tax drive in this new year?
Look, Tolu, the tax drive and the tax bracket, you give it to this administration, they've been able to catch more Nigerians into the tax bracket and that. What they need to go is, it's not something that will be addressed overnight. It's not something that will be addressed in the next couple of months. I mean, we're talking about years. You have to keep addressing these challenges, getting more Nigerians in the tax bracket. So in doing that also, they don't have to, I keep saying, they don't have to think all this one financial year like they are trying to do. They need to begin to see how they can help start off this effective. Then they need to give them tax bracket. And then you might not get the kind of tax that you are projecting in the short term. But in the long run, you are going to supersede those projections, because when you begin to create the environment and you begin to get more startups, you begin to get more Nigerians employed, then you get more people in the tax bracket. And then think of innovation on how to capture those in the informal sector. It's very important, because as it stands now, the informal sector is the largest employer of labor in Nigeria. Over 80% of Nigerians are in the informal sector. That is the sector that needs the hard work. But unfortunately, government is not ready to do the hard work.
Okay, so before we wrap up this tax conversation, let's quickly touch on something that developed last year. So we saw the Federal High Court and Port Harcourt in a landmark judgment hold that it was unconstitutional for the Federal Inland Revenue Service to collect VAT, that's value-added tax, and personal income tax on behalf of Rivers State. And we've seen that this court battle has continued. Lagos State has also joined this legal suit. This is really a game changer, and it brings about some fiscal restructuring, as many people have been asking about in Nigeria. But there are concerns about the states having the infrastructure to take on this responsibility. We're heading into 2022. What do you think is going to happen? Because this has launched into the conversation around internally generated revenue, the ability of states to control their own money, and of course the revenue coming from taxes. Do you expect this to be a settlement out of court between the federal government and the state, or will we take this all the way to the Supreme Court?
I think they will take it, the states that are involved. When you look at those states that are always states that want to get more revenue, there are states that are giving more projects out, there are states that think that they are doing well in terms of infrastructural development, and they want to see those money come back to them. So I envisage that we could see those cases going as far as the Supreme Court. But even after the judgment, there might be a political solution, because sometimes you need to get that judgment first. Then we begin to advocate for a political solution than having that political solution without a judgment. Because that's what's happening in the budget now. Remember, there was a time that the presidency under President Goodluck Jonathan took the National Assembly to court as regards whether they have the right to be inside projects into the budget that were not put by the executive. Unfortunately, they came out and had a political solution to that, and we are back to those issues now. And the president is complaining about how many projects, how many projects, even state and local government. So I will expect them to go all out and get this trust out first. Then you begin to think of a political solution because of those states that depend so much on the federation account revenue, especially from other states. So, but I think the political solution for me should be, if I am going to have a project in my state and I'm implementing a project, then the withholding tax should come back to me, not to the federal government, because the project itself is being financed by the state government. How can I, state government, be financing projects and in turn be not paying the withholding tax to the federal government? I think that is, for me, that is morally even very wrong. Then secondly, do the state have the machinery to embark upon this? I don't think, even with Lagos State, I would think to put an exception to it. They don't have those kind of machinery that we have in the federal inland revenue. So it's another way, another political solution is to use the federal inland revenue as a tax collecting on behalf of the state, then share it based on the revenue that you're able to generate from each state. Now, look at the challenge. Banks that have their headquarters here in Lagos State pay their own taxes to Lagos State government, and Lagos State government calculate that as part of their income tax. But at the time of that, if I'm making a call in Kaduna, the withholding tax goes to Lagos State, the tax goes to Lagos State. So those are things that cannot be addressed by some of these states because they don't have the infrastructure to do that. So I think they should also begin to look at the political solution, involve the federal inland revenue. We cannot just cut them out, and then we could take it from there. That is why I'm worried that the federal government is not even looking at that judgment. They have been projecting their budget based on what they will earn from those taxes that are even in line for maybe a judgment that may go against them.
Okay, so let's take a break now, Muktar. When we come back, we'll talk about Nigeria's appetite for borrowing. We'll also get into the revenue conversation as it involves the country's crude oil sector. So today, we're forecasting Nigeria's 2022 economic performance. My guest is Muktar Mohammed, and the conversation continues after this. Nigeria is under the spotlight today on Business Edge, and my guest, Muktar Mohammed, is looking at the country's possible 2022 economic performance. So, Muktar, as 2021 rounded out, we saw the federal government announce it was planning 12 trillion naira in fresh borrowing, and that Nigeria's public debt would increase to 50 trillion naira by 2023. Nigeria's debt service expenditure is estimated at 3.61 trillion naira, representing about 35.6% of the projected revenue of the country for 2022. The deficit is expected to be financed by new borrowings, privatization proceeds, and drawdowns on loans secured for specific projects. When you look at the appetite that the country has had for the past several years on borrowing and using loans, do you think we're going to see that trend continue into 2022? Muktar?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes, like I said, in terms of borrowing, and which the presidency have finally admitted, it's not about the GDP any longer, it's about the revenue, which is a big challenge to us. And we keep on looking at the easy way out of it is to keep borrowing and making sure that future generations are going to pay for it. Not even this administration is going to pay any of those debts. If you remember that they have a moratorium for the next 2 years, this administration will be living in the next 2 years also. So they might not even be the one to pay any of the debt. So for me, the government should begin to look at the long-term strategy. And the long-term strategy that is being developed all over the world is a PPP, public-public partnership. You begin to look at some of these projects that are very economically viable as a means whereby I want the private sector to take this project. And those payments that are generated, you tell them to build and operate for the next 25 years, for the next 20 years, for the next 10 years, depending on the economic viability on the revenue projection of those projects. You could use that instead of you always thinking of borrowing. I think for me, that is the greatest challenge we have. In terms of borrowing, you can't say they are borrowed well because they are borrowing for infrastructure. But now let's begin to use those infrastructure as an asset to get a payment plan that will be suitable, that future generation will not have to suffer for it. And then government will be able to enact sort of these funds that are used for borrowing into social investment, whereby we affect the downtrodden and will bring a lot of people out of the poverty level. For me, that is the longer way that we should be looking at it, not always just thinking that we just have the means, we will give the money, the price of oil is good, the international community must give us the money. But then let's begin to look at most of these projects. The power project, I don't see any reason why government should be putting money in Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. I don't see how more government should be putting money in Second Niger. These are economic viable projects that can live on their own, that the private sector will be able to take up. We saw that play out in the airport. We see the MM2. It's been driven by private sector. And government is not being involved. So rather they are supposed to pay tax and other revenues to government. Government should begin to think at it, look at it like that. If a country like the United States is current and infrastructural development bill on PPP, then I don't see a reason why Nigeria should not be part of it.
Okay. So as we continue the conversation about revenue, let's talk about a sector that is critical to Nigeria's revenue. That's the crude oil sector. And it remains one that's very important. But last year, as prices fluctuated internationally, Nigeria was hit by those fluctuations. The country was also unable to meet its OPEC quota. And at one point in time, Libya overtook Nigeria as the continent's largest producer. We've also seen in the budget for this year that we're putting a crude oil benchmark at about $62.57. There's still conversation around that, but at least around $62 per barrel. We've also seen the signing of the Petroleum Industry Act by President Muhammad Buhari. What are your projections for the industry in 2022?
Well, it's looking bullish for the industry already. Oil price hit $80 per barrel just yesterday, so it's looking bullish for them. And then the legislature will begin to justify their increment in terms of the oil price from $57 to $65. They will begin to justify it now. But then it's not still justifiable because we are looking at a crude oil production of 1.7 barrels. So, but the good news is that we are back as the top producer in Africa. There's relative peace in the economy, in terms of security in the Niger Delta, not like what we're having in the northeast or north central. So it's looking good in that sector and in the oil sector. But now the main challenge will be how much of this revenue can government begin to use in terms of, is it to do more capital projects, or most of this revenue also will be turned into debt services. For me, that is what government should be looking at the moment. If that sector looks bullish, it's one of the key drivers of Nigerian economy, and it's looking very good.
So let's stay with that sector. So in late November, the government announced that they were going to get rid of fuel subsidies from mid-2022 and onwards. The federal government has said that subsidy was not, in fact, benefiting low-income Nigerian families, and instead they're planning to introduce a monthly allowance of 5,000 naira for low-income households for 6 years to about 1 year, rather 6 months, I beg your pardon, to about 1 year. This wasn't exactly laid out in the budget for 2022. There's really no provisions for this. We're getting some estimated costs as to how much this will cost the country. But when you think about the subsidy issue and the conversation in Nigeria, do you think this will happen this year? And what impact could it have on the economy?
So, I wish it happens this year. I'm an advocate of removal of subsidy. It does not do any good to the generality of Nigeria, especially the lower part of Nigeria. It's doing good most to businessmen and to government. You must understand that for the past 3 to 4 years, no oil company, not major oil company, has imported any drop of PMS into Nigeria. This has been done by NNPC, solely by NNPC. And that is why there's been a reduction in terms of what NNPC accrued into the Federation account. So it's a big challenge. It has done no one good, and I think subsidies should go. Now, the step of trying to give Nigerians 5,000 naira, I think that is very insulting, because if you do that, you're only addressing about 40 million Nigerians, and it's going to cost you about 2.6 trillion. And you are saying you are saying about 3 trillion. So if you do that, then what you're only just saving about 400 million. For me, it doesn't make sense. Rather, government should not. And remember that we have about 70 million Nigerians that are extremely poor. When you address only 40 million, what happened to the other 30 million that are extremely poor? And what are the criteria to determine whether I have 5,000? And I keep saying it. Government should begin to take an holistic effect on what will affect both the rich and the poor if you are trying to address subsidy issue. You shouldn't be looking at it as an area whereby you only address it to the poor and thinking that the rich, because the rich themselves are the employer.
Oh, unfortunately, we lost Muktar there, and we're just about to wrap up the conversation. But I get the point, and if I can assume what he's saying is that you also have to realize that those in higher income brackets, the quote-unquote rich, are also employers of labor. And at the end of the day, the cost of fuel affects everyone. So there is conversation around Nigeria removing the fuel subsidy and instead replacing it with these conditional cash transfers of 5,000 naira to a select portion of the population. Who are those people? How will it be decided? How much would it be? The value and the cost of it for 6 months versus the cost of it for 1 year are completely different. And yet this has not been captured in the 2022 budget. But of course, there's a supplementary budget that we should expect, and it could be contained in that. My last question to Muktar would have been on the projected growth rates. The International Monetary Fund is projecting an economic growth rate of 2.7% for 2022 for Nigeria. Nigeria's population growth rate is 2.5%. So you're basically growing your population at the same rates. You're struggling to grow your economy, and the numbers simply is not good enough. So the last question I would have had for him would have been, what options does Nigeria have in this year? And of course, the issues that will shape Nigeria's economic performance in 2022. There's still the security conversation to be had. Food inflation and food prices are parts of that conversation as well, ending the year with very high food prices as Nigerians struggled to find food in the market. But we will be looking forward to having Muktar Mohammed back on the show again. He's one of our regulars here on Business Edge. But this is how we'll wrap things up with one more thing to do. After the break, it's NC4 to watch. And crude oil will be a major topic of discussion throughout the year, not just in Nigeria, but across the world. And that's where we start with NC4 to watch. The international oil benchmark, Brent crude, is now $80 per barrel after the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and its Russia-led partners, commonly called OPEC+, approved another 400,000 barrels per day hike in production quotas. And we come to Nigeria now, where the country produced a total of 440.774 million barrels of crude oil, valued at about 12.4 trillion naira between January and November 2021. The crude oil and condensate production for 2021 documents from the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission indicated that the federal government raked in that amount from crude oil alone during the review period. The CEO of Algeria's Sonatrach oil company, Taoufik Hakar, says that the company is preparing to resume its activities in Libya. Hakar indicated that the company is working with its partners in the country to create conditions for the safe return of workers and equipment, adding that visits will be organized before the end of next February to negotiate the return of Sonatrach to Libya. And finally, the European Union's landmark proposal to label natural gas as a green energy source has answered Africa's call for a just and inclusive energy transition framework. This new proposal will pave the way for new European investments in natural gas across the continent. And that's Business Edge for today. A big thank you to my guests, and thank you to you as well for watching. Don't forget you can follow us on our social media platforms, download our mobile app, and of course watch us on the platforms we're available to you: Star Times, Avo TV, Freeview, as well as NYMEX in Russia. My name is Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. I'll see you again soon.